My apologies. My apologies. Let's jump back in.
Okay. Is everybody good?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. I have changed my setup just a little bit, partly because this is public speaking. So what I did was I went down the hallway and got a lectern out of one of the classrooms. So I'm back in my office, but I'm actually standing. The video is pointing a little bit upward at my nose. Sorry about that, but I just wanted to have the freedom of standing instead of sitting for a while. Want to again start talking about the attitudes that we have as public speakers, and one of them is a key failure of an area of pride that can come to us. Are the slides showing on the screen, Brother Joel?
Yes.
Okay, great. As we are emphasizing success in public speaking, the biggest thing that frightens me is that success may actually lead to a sense of arrogance. And so anything that we say about style is not to produce pride in us. We're not supposed to be proud of our intellect. We shouldn't be proud of being relevant in our speaking style, or even worshipful, or funny, or successful as a preacher or as a communicator. And we can even be proud about our humility if we have the wrong definition of humility. And this starts to show through at the end of a service as somebody walks up and thanks you profusely for what you said, or if they really pat you on the back and say, that was a great sermon. Those are moments where you start to actually realize who you're serving, if you're serving yourself or if you're really serving the Lord. And you're probably going to have to struggle a little bit to suppress these feelings of self-satisfaction and turn the entire focus back to the Lord. My pastor, anytime he receives a compliment, he just says thank you. And he may say something about how he was glad that that was an encouragement or that it was a help. And so success certainly is desirable because that means you were a good communicator, but you don't want the success to become the point. You always want the congregation to be lifted up to the Lord instead of lifted up to admire you. So we're going to talk now about the technicalities of the art of delivery. And I want to give credit to a couple of people who have been a big influence in my life. The university, Bob Jones University, publishes a speech textbook for the first year. And Effective Speech for the Christian was originally written by Anna Lloyd Neal. Her husband was a pastor and preacher. And then many years later, the book was revised and edited by Dr. Lonnie Polson, who also has been a pastor and a Bible teacher. And so this is our basic freshman speech text, and I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. This image shows our Hall of Honor here in the third floor of our Fine Arts building, and this is just some of the pictures that are hanging on the wall of the people who have been my teachers and the teachers of my teachers, and a really big influence in the speech and communication and theater program here at Bob Jones University. So I want to thank them for their years of excellence and influence and how they've influenced hundreds and even thousands of preacher boys here at the university. We're going to address a lot of different topics, and I don't know with the time that we have how far we will make it today, but I want to start off with attitude and nervousness and common problems. And then we may get so far as to talk about eye contact, gestures, movement, and face, and possibly, and this is probably more than we'll ever get to today, vocal production, vocal variety, voice, diction, pronunciation, grammar, and vocabulary. All of these are dimensions of public speaking skills that can be mastered and that you want to spend some time thinking about. Whether English is your first language or you have other first languages, also these things are relevant. As a preacher, your attitude, first of all, needs to be sincere. You want your voice to sound conversational. Even if you're using the proclamational style, you don't want to have artificiality. And you need to be energetic and authoritative, as we discussed, because of the authority of the Bible. I like to tell my public speaking students, anytime they're getting up to give a speech, that communicating is not performing. Communicating is connecting. In other words, even though we may be talking about facts of performing skill, those performance skills are not the same thing as communication. The real communication happens when real people connect emotionally, intellectually, psychologically, socially. And when it comes to preaching, it's an especially important connection. And this is why God does not announce the truth through robots. And he so far has not announced the truth through angels. Although during the book of Revelation, the tribulation period, there will be angels who actually preach the gospel. But that's not for the church age right now. God has chosen people to do the talking. And so that is because in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, that God has put us into tribulation and difficulties because he is the God of comfort and mercy. He comforts us in our afflictions. And that means that we are supposed to be able to comfort anybody else. And it's that kind of understanding of the congregation because you walked in the same shoes and had the same difficulties that gives you insight and understanding so that you can really reach them where they are. That means that the connecting is very natural because you truly do sympathize and empathize. Even if you've never had the exact same experience, hopefully you've had something in common with your people on a specific topic. But having that exact experience is a lot more beneficial because then you're connecting with them is so much more real. And you can speak from sincerity of heart because you yourself have walked with God through that kind of circumstance. And that's why God uses preachers and Bible teachers, because we've had to live the truth ourselves. And that means that we're authentic and we can truly relate to other people. And so Peter cautions the servants of God that we are to shepherd the flock of God. They are his sheep. They belong to him. They're not ours. And I have to remind myself of this when I walk into my classroom every day, that these students, first of all, they belong to God. And second, they belong to their families. And their families have entrusted them to our care and good teaching at Bob Jones University. We have an honorable trust that we must keep with those families and with their children. And as a dad of two young boys, I feel how much I care about my own son's education. And I try to bring that same feeling into the classroom when I'm dealing with students who are 15 and 20 years older than my children. But they have that same relationship with their moms and dads that I have. And I want my children to have wonderful experience at their young age. And I want to deliver that same wonderful content and relationship in the classroom to students who are college age. And so by way of analogy, I would say that's true of your congregation. These are God's people, and you want to deliver the absolute best possible Christian experience that you can for them. Not because we're domineering over them, we're not exercising lordship over them, but rather our lives are to be examples, both exemplary in our behavior and character, but also examples in terms of having walked with the Lord through difficulty. And we know how faithful God is, and we know how that changes our tone of voice, and it changes the look in our eye, and it changes the feeling in our heart when we talk with people about things that we ourselves have found to be absolutely true and reliable from the God of the universe, because he has walked with us through those same pathways. And that totally changes your delivery style. You cannot be aloof. You can't be distant. You can't be artificial when you are sharing what you yourself have learned through experience walking with God. And that's the most important attitude to have, regardless of any other technical skills that you might have. Well, nervousness is one. Go ahead, Joel.
Yeah, just one question here. Do you have a PowerPoint up? Because I think we might be seeing just frozen at the key failure pride.
Okay. Yeah, there is a PowerPoint up, and I'm sorry it wasn't sharing and it wasn't advancing. I'm going to stop my video and restart it, and I'm going to resume share. That's where the problem was. Okay.
Great. We're all set. Thank you.
I'm glad that you interrupted. Thank you so much. So communicating is not performing, communicating is connecting. It's a human to human conversation that is superintended by the Holy Spirit of God as he is speaking his own words to them. And there is this supernatural thing going on every time that we share the Bible, whether it's preaching or personal evangelism or counseling or whatever. It's connecting, it's not performing. That doesn't mean that performing skills don't matter, but it does mean that the performing skills are in the zone of getting rid of problems. So here's one problem to get rid of: nervousness. And I think all of us feel the excitement when it's time to stand up and speak. And so nervousness is a very common experience. It's very natural, and it's actually helpful because the nervousness has a physical name. It's called adrenaline. It's the physical chemical in your body that makes you ready to do great things. It's the fight or flight syndrome. And so you've got to have that heightened sense of awareness, but sometimes it makes us shake, or our knees are shaking, or we call it butterflies in our stomach, or our tongue gets dry, or we get so excited that we stumble over our words. And I think all of us are worried about that. Frankly, most of the time, nervousness is not as noticeable as we think it is. And so especially for beginning Bible teachers and speakers, I spend a lot of time talking about nervousness. How to get rid of it? Well, practice and prepare. You will be nervous if you're not ready. But if you are really ready, at least you're not afraid that you have nothing to say. So then relax and certainly pray and ask the Lord to help you cope with your emotional condition. And if you're like me this morning, I got snarled in traffic. There was a car wreck that was blocking the normal way that I come to the office. There was a train blocking several roads that blocked the other way that I was coming to the office. And I was glad that I had left the house extra early, because even at that, I still got here 7 or 8 minutes late. And I had to ask the Lord, help me to calm down. Don't let me be upset by this. And those kinds of things happen. And you've got to be able to control your own mind, your own spirit, your body. And a lot of that comes through the Holy Spirit helping you. Okay, so when you're ready to speak, get rid of distractions. I turn my phone off so that it's only on vibrate. Now, I maybe use it for timing, but I don't want that thing ringing during class or during a sermon. I usually take my keys out of my pants pocket and I set them in a safe place, like a preaching bag. I carry a bag with me when I go preaching, and I take all the stuff out of my pockets and I put it in there, because otherwise I play with it. And I'll have a coin in my pocket and I'll be fingering that coin. Or maybe some people, have a tendency to pick up a pen and they twirl the pen. And all of that kind of stuff is very distracting. So get rid of the things, even a ring. If you wear a wedding ring, you play with it, or you're playing with your watch, all of that stuff actually gets in the way of the audience listening to you. So act confident. Stand up, speak with confidence, even if you don't feel it. If you can smile at the audience, even if you're not a smiley kind of person. In America, we think that smiling is good. I think in other cultures sometimes Americans are perceived as being superficial and fake, because we make friends on such a slender basis, and everything is just so fast and quick and everything is frothy. I understand that, so I'm not trying to contradict your cultural expectations, but I would say have a pleasant attitude and have a pleasant mindset about your congregation. And if you can talk with them ahead of time and speak with people down in the congregation before the service, sometimes that's a really good thing to do. I know other pastors like to keep very focused and they don't want to do that. But just don't overreact to the situation, because the Lord is with you and he's going to help you to do well. And I think a lot of times our nervousness is because we're focused on ourselves. If you turn around and focus on the audience and what they're going to receive and what they're going to benefit from, then your nervousness is transformed, because you're doing something good to the people you are with rather than doing something defensive to protect yourself. Common problems. I just illustrated it. I said the word and I suppose every language has its variation of this idea. When I was learning public speaking in Switzerland, there are certain phrases in the German language like so and ya. And they're just connective words, or they're vocalized pauses. And people throw them in because their brain isn't working and they're not thinking. So I've learned that there are two kinds of ums in public speaking. The first is the one that's peppered everywhere. And every 3 or 4 words, the person says That is the sign of an unprepared mind. That is a sign of a mind that is not on message. The mind is distracted, scattered. There's no clear sense of where the words are going to go. And so the person is always struggling for the next idea. And that is when is peppered everywhere. Now, the other kind of I see with my students who are very well prepared. And that occurs between every sentence. And they say the next sentence. And they say the next sentence. And that's a purely vocalized pause. And they're using the word as a springboard into the next sentence. That is a habit that can be broken completely just through awareness. And when you feel the word coming, catch it and be silent. Just don't vocalize. If you feel the vibration here, then you have said the word And you don't want to feel that vibration in your throat, and you don't want to hear yourself saying So the solution to is clear thinking, good preparation, and in the moment, self-control. And when you feel the habit of coming out, just stop. Don't say anything. And you can get rid of the word about 80% of the time by doing that. Some are natural. Some are part of the flow of turn-taking in conversation. Maybe you really are thinking, and maybe you are interacting with a class member, and so the word happens. That's okay, because it's a little bit. But when the word is all the time, it gets to be, people just start counting. And you might be up to 90 or 100 in a 10-minute presentation. That's ridiculous. And so you can get rid of those vocalized pauses. I see a lot of nodding of heads. It sounds like I'm talking about something that you've experienced before. Is that true? Okay. So practice and think clearly, and will mostly go away. Other problems that I tend to have to write a lot of comments when I'm grading my students' speeches. I call them rough delivery, verbal clutter, lack of eye contact, and lack of energy. By rough delivery, I mean that there is choppiness and a lot of and a lot of awkward pauses and phrasing that just does not flow smoothly. And again, I know that this is different from one language to another because the music of every language is different. And Western European languages tend to be very syntactical, grammatical. My wife is native from Russia, and they have certain sentence patterns that indicate questions and other sentence patterns that indicate statements. And that was part of what I had to learn when I was studying Russian. Now, Asian languages are completely different, especially the languages that are tonal. And tonal languages behave in an altogether different way that I don't have any personal experience with. And so I'm sure that the rules of delivery with a tonal language are different. But in general, everybody wants a connected flow of words. In other words, there ought not to be a lot of breakups and choppiness. Pauses are good when pauses are purposeful. But when we start putting extra words in there, that's called verbal clutter. So like I said, and so on, things like that, sort of, kind of, maybe, these little words that start peppering our language and making it weaker, less precise, fuzzy, and cluttered. You can get rid of those words by just recognizing your habit. Maybe you need to record yourself or go back and listen to a recording of a recent sermon that you've delivered, and you can start to pick up on some of these bad habits. Eye contact and energy are the other two basic things that I'm always reminding my students to work on. I want them to be away from their notes and looking at the audience. Now, right here, I have a little camera. And over here, I have a little icon of myself. And do you know where my eye wants to go? My eye wants to go over to the image of myself. But that's the wrong place to look because I'm on TV, so to speak. I got to look at the camera, all right? And the same thing with you in a public speaking setting. If you've got a PowerPoint, don't turn around and talk to the screen. Don't stand there and stare at your monitor when the audience is out in front of you. Don't look down at the piece of paper in front of you, or the trendy new thing is to have an iPad or some other kind of device that electronically you're scrolling through your notes. I'm old school. I don't do that. I don't trust my devices, and I just like paper if I have notes. But if your eye contact is on anything but the people, there is a break in the relationship. And again, I am talking from an American point of view. The American assumption is that eye contact and directness is honesty and is respectfulness. And I understand that in Asian cultures, behavior with eyes is very much status oriented, and there's a totally different way of expressing respect. But whatever is normative in your culture, connect with your audience. But if your face is buried in your notes or your face is trapped by a screen, then you are probably not connecting with the audience. Finally, energy. When I say energy, I mean speak up. I mean act like you are awake, even if you are an introvert. And that actually is me. I started my public speaking life as an introvert. I was terrified. I was physically sick. I hated speaking. And even to this day, I get really keyed up the night before, and it's rolling through my mind what I'm going to say. And actually that happened last night. I was trying to go to bed early because I wanted to be fresh and ready for this morning. And I just had to pray and ask the Lord, please help me to stop thinking about this. I've got to go to sleep. Well, then the Lord woke me up about an hour and a half early this morning. And I struggled with that, and I thought, do I really? And then I woke up, and I was keyed up and was ready, and I was working on updating some of the things in this presentation because I'm really excited to talk to you. Now, I'm not sleepy this morning, but let me talk about energy for a minute. I'm actually wide awake, but there are times when I have to teach on a Saturday, or maybe you have to get up early on a Sunday, and maybe you really didn't get enough sleep. Paul talked about watchings often. In other words, Paul had a lot of sleepless nights. And I think that pastors, especially when they have family crisis and emergency come up, Saturday night over into Sunday, they may not get enough sleep. And they may actually walk into the pulpit on Sunday morning and it's like, oh, I'm so sleepy. You cannot let that show to your congregation. You've got to act like you're there on purpose. You've got to feel the enthusiasm that the congregation feels. They have come for a special occasion. It's Sunday morning church. It is the worship of God. And if the leader gets up and acts like he's sound asleep or tired or sad to be there, that is a total contradiction to the purpose of the entire thing. And so vocalize with energy. Now, the fastest way to seem energetic is to talk louder. And I wonder if you can tell any difference between last hour when I was sitting and right now when I am standing. I am in classroom lecture mode right now. And I'm sorry, I hope I'm not just exploding the speaker on your computer, because here's this little microphone and you can turn your volume down, but I am using my public speaking voice. And my office partner over there on that side of the wall and on that side of the wall, I'm sure that they can hear me talking because I'm using a classroom voice. And then when you get into a bigger hall, like a church building with 100 or 200 or 500 seats, you really have to pick up your voice. You say, but I have a microphone. The microphone only makes you louder. It does not make you more present. And so even when you have a microphone, you have to do the work. You've got to find the energy. And the fastest way to seem more energetic is this: talk louder. That's it. Just talk louder. Because the physicality of talking louder looks like energy. Now, I hope that you wake up. I hope that you had a good night's sleep. I hope that you are well rested and have good health, and I hope that you have all of the things that your body needs to be at your best. I hope that your attitude is excited about what you're saying. And even if you're an introvert person who likes to be quiet, you have a mission, you have a message and a purpose, and that purpose is animating you and enlivening you. And then you will not look deadpan and tired and like you'd rather be anywhere else but here. Okay, so meet the congregation's expectations, speak up with energy, and that partially is physical and it's partially attitudinal, and of course it's spiritual. Here are some more common problems. Time, the length of time. Now I have a little clock down here on my desk and I see that it's 9:47 Eastern time in the US. That means that we have no more than 13 minutes to go. That's it. Got to quit. And we went a little bit overtime in the last session before we took a break. And so we have a little flexibility. You got to know your congregation. What are their expectations regarding time? Now, in the American context, we say time is money. And we measure time and save time and spend time and invest time. And we keep talking about time. And then we take Paul's exhortation to do all things decently and in order, and we take that to mean that you have to start church on time, and you have to have a certain order of service where everything has a certain amount of time, and then you got to quit on time because people have to go home and do lunch and everything else. And so in America, we put a very strong emphasis on time. That is not true everywhere around the world. And so there are cultures where the starting time might be 9:30, but people start to show up at 9:45, 10 o'clock, and maybe things get going by 10:15, and still people are showing up. And so Americans who go to minister in other cultures, they have to be sensitive to those cultures' expectations and understanding of how time should be used. And in general, the difference between one culture and another is how much it values the task and how much it values the relationship. And in the cultures that like to start a little bit slower and have a more relaxed approach to things, they are investing their time into people instead of into the task of doing the service. And so it's not that one is better than the other. It's that you have to understand the cultural conventions of your situation. And if you're in a Western or American context, then time really is significant and you got to quit on time. Speaking with a translator, or actually the better word is an interpreter. My wife is actually a master's level interpreter of English and Russian language. She did her master's degree in this area. And so I'm very sensitive to issues of translating and interpreting. And some of my favorite moments in life are when she has been my translator, my interpreter with congregations in Russia, as the mission team that I traveled with is all over Europe, and she was translating for the team in Russia. So I really love the topic of translating and interpreting. With the musical mission team, I traveled throughout Europe and was translated by missionaries and national workers all over different countries of Europe, and I learned a few things. And one of the things I learned is that if you don't have an interpreter, you don't have a message. And so I'm really offended, actually, by joking that the interpreter is the interrupter. That is not a good joke, in my opinion. The interpreter is your voice. And so the two of you are like two horses pulling together in a yoke. And the two of you are pulling together. And one of the most amazing spiritual experiences I ever had was with a congregation in Romania in a small village with a really big church. And pretty much the whole village came to church that day, and the windows were open and the people were outside. And I started the message with the Romanian expression for peace, pace, which for them is a very common spiritual greeting. And the whole crowd spoke back to me, pace. I found out later that every American preacher had been doing that, so they were kind of in the habit. But that interpreter and I, it's one of the few times ever I could say that we were lifted up by the Spirit of God. And he knew exactly what I was going to say. As I was saying it, he was topping my lines. I was topping his lines. And we were just back and forth. And it was amazing. And if you ever have that kind of relationship with an interpreter, then you know the Spirit of God has done something very special. Most of the time, it doesn't work out that way. And interpreting is an issue of taking turns, short sentences, simple, straight vocabulary that's easy to explain. If you get really long sentences, or if you break the idea halfway through, the interpreter can't do their job. And so you've got to understand the target language. The interpreter has to have key verses ahead of time. They got to know the general structure of your outline. Some interpreters even want to see a full manuscript a whole week in advance, depending on their skill level and how comfortable they are with spontaneous interpretation. So if you do have guest speakers, or if you are a guest speaker, interpretation is a really great skill to develop. Well, I have more to say along the lines of eye contact and gesture and vocal production and other things. Perhaps with my final session, we can address some of those things. Not sure if we want to go that direction right now, but I think with the remaining 7 or 8 minutes that we have, maybe we can have some questions or some back and forth dialogue.
Yeah, excuse me. I'm just kind of interested because, you mentioned the, excuse me just a second, I'll get that feedback fixed. So you mentioned this challenge that can happen with, or this difference that can happen with viewpoint and eye contact, that in an American context, Western context, we highly value this. What do I say? I'm wondering, is there something kind of more fundamental? It's something in us humans. I have been where I see eye contact used in an unexpected way. And if I filter it through the way I grew up, then I misinterpret. So that, for instance, I'm thinking of a place in Zambia, and when the wedding happens, the bride comes down the aisle and she's like this, all the way down the aisle. And so to me, it looked like she was horrified and desperate, and actually, no, that's just what you do. So, you've got some things like that, but there's something there, isn't there? It seems like there's something inherent in us as humans that eye contact is such a core, powerful thing. Have you been in a place, or are you aware of a place where a speaker would not want to make eye contact, or any kind of feedback there?
That is a really good question, and the answer is I don't know. All of my speaking has been in American and Western European situations, and so I think what you're describing, however, the cultural conventions that are on top of normal human nature. I think in general we would say person to person, when we're equal status, we want to look each other in the eyes. The eyes are the window to the soul. This is a famous expression. However, as you mentioned the word power, this is very much what eye contact is used to distinguish who has authority and who does not, who is submitting and who is in charge, and who is expressing deference and respect and who is expressing authority. And so I think those are the differences. And since the preacher is usually the one of authority or status, I'm having a hard time imagining a situation where the preacher would not use eye contact that's typical for an authority in that culture.
Interesting. Kind of a follow-up on that. So one of the things that I've found myself processing a good bit as far as the PowerPoint question, I'm asking you this, we will talk about PowerPoint in the next lecture, but you're a communications professional. So you're a communications teacher, and I want to know how this strikes you. One of the things that is always on my mind with PowerPoint is that I have just shifted the locus of attention away from here up to there. And so I'm only going to put something up there that is so critical to my communication that it's going to help them understand. as far as just putting up, I've got to have something up there because I'm talking right now. So therefore something's got to be up there because I can't talk unless something's up there. No, I can be willing to just give them a black screen for a while. And then very much I'm aware of if anything is going on up there, then I know that I just sold a little bit of my attention to the screen. And that means that I'm adjusting the formula a little bit, and I've got to be aware and recognize that. To give a very specific example of this last week, I did just this last Sunday. It wasn't technically a PowerPoint, and so what happened? I'm showing a diagram within another app, and it's part of my outline, and it's critical to my communication. And I felt good about it. I really felt good about it. But in the middle of the sermon, a notification popped up on my phone. An email came in, and I saw smirks all the way across the audience. And so I got rid of that, and I turned off my Wi-Fi, and I said, "Sorry, let's keep on going." Hopefully that didn't. But so I lost something there. I lost some attention. If anything goes on up there, then it's pulling them away from what's here. So trying to balance that as a speaker, I want them in the preaching moment. I want them really to be focused on the words that are being said more than the graphics I've got up on the screen. Any thoughts there? Any feedback you'll give me?
My primary rule for PowerPoint is what I call intelligent minimalism. Intelligent minimalism. In other words, be smart and only put a little bit on the screen. Now, the PowerPoint that I have used today is a teacher's PowerPoint, not a preacher's PowerPoint. I have been didactically delivering ideas as a teacher, but a preacher who primarily thinks of himself as a classroom teacher, I think is making a mistake. The teacher is primarily an inspirational leader who is leading the congregation to experience, know God. And that's where intelligent minimalism might even tell you don't use PowerPoint. Maybe. Or if you do use PowerPoint, it's just to hook the audience, to give them a place to hang their hat, and to know where we are in your structure. And if you've got a clearly structured outline, a couple of PowerPoint slides that give that outline to the audience, I think that's intelligent minimalism. And then to your idea about being off the network, I even had an email notification here on the screen coming in from our university email server. I think that a church ought to have a dedicated computer that the pastor can control if he wants to, but that has no way of getting interruptions. And that's not always feasible. Another thing, the bigger the church, the more screens you got to have. So maybe a PowerPoint screen and a face of the preacher, and that would be for a really big room. But that costs a lot of money, and Paul didn't need that either. So those are a few thoughts.
Good. That's good. I'm kind of curious about, I'm going to put this up, and then I think this will probably take us out for the time. So this is something that I'm kind of exploring, and I want to get what your input would be on this or how you feel about it. So I tried when I said this about this last Sunday, this is what I did. Basically, these were the points of my sermon, because what I'm realizing I'm doing more and more, I'm realizing in the sermon, I tend to think of it as an outline, but actually it's a set of ideas, like this concept linked to that concept and so forth. And so I actually I created this flow chart. This is the thoughts, and this is how this works for my sermon. I created this flow chart, and then I actually just chose to put it up on the screen, and they could look through it as we were going. I felt like it was helping not just have the kind of the mechanism, the mechanical, the kind of, at this point, worn out and a little bit dull idea of a strictly Roman numeral outline, and more giving them an idea of, hey, these are ideas that are linked to each other. Any thoughts that you have there as far as, so basically what I did is I just gave away everything I was going to say. Though I could zoom in as I was going, and I could cover stuff, I would just zoom in and show them this one concept, and then we would go down here and look at this concept. But there was kind of a flow of thought in that. Any thoughts there, or how does that strike you as a strategy, communication strategy, and how might that affect the way people are following things?
I would agree, first of all, that you are very insightful in realizing that not everything is a linear Roman numeral ABC kind of outline, because that very sequential kind of display of ideas is not how all content works. And there are plenty of Bible passages that do not easily break down into a traditional outline, but rather they're circular or they're clustered. And I think that's what you're trying to display here. And where were you in the United States doing that, or were you in Philippines, or where were you?
No, that was in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Okay. But I think that your cross-cultural understanding is starting to play in here, because the traditional Western linearity, I would say, is unique to the United States and Western Europe. But other cultures have many other ways of bringing ideas into focus, and they have a totally different mental picture of the world. And I think that's part of what's going on with this diagram here. I think the other thing that made the diagram successful was that you were able to zoom in. And I think the whole diagram gives the audience something interesting to look at, where they say, well, there's a big interesting diagram on the screen. And they see that there's this flow of ideas, so that's good. And then by yours intelligently zooming around, you were leading them, and that's very important. I think if you were not zooming in according to your own intentions, I think it would be really hard for them to see the whole diagram and read the small print. And if that were the case, and if that diagram is super important, I'd print it on a handout and give it to everybody, and then do exactly what you did, which was walk them through the different places of the handout. Because people just kind of, small print on a big screen doesn't work. And so I'm going to anticipate PowerPoint, got to have big text, because what you see on your laptop is not what you see in the room. Because the big screen in a big room is 100 feet away from the person in the back row. And if they got glasses, they can't see anything. My eyes are getting old. I can't see stuff like I used to. And so if you're really, if you're really going to not be able to zoom, then I would definitely give a handout. But I think that you had the right intention and you had the right approach, because you were able to zoom around.
Helpful. Thank you. I would like to continue this conversation, and we will have the opportunity to do so. So we'll have you back in, I think a week and a half or 2 weeks. Looking forward to talking more then and continuing the conversation. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time. I'm sorry.
And a good day.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you. God bless.